My name is Alara Vance. For the past few years, since returning from my last assignment overseas with a global relief organization, I've lived a quiet life nestled in a small cottage by the coast. A place where the rhythm of the tides dictates the pace of my days rather than the urgent clamor of human crisis. My garden, filled with resilient wildflowers and herbs that thrive in the salty air, is my sanctuary. Here, amidst the whispering grasses and the distant cry of gulls, I've tried to piece back together the parts of myself that felt scattered by the winds of difficult places and challenging experiences. My work, primarily in regions recovering from conflict or natural disaster, involved setting up temporary shelters, coordinating aid, and often just being a steady presence in the midst of chaos. It was demanding, sometimes heartbreaking, but it felt meaningful, a stark contrast to the life my younger sister, Serena, had always chased, one of polished surfaces and societal approval. Our paths had diverged early. Serena, with her effortless charm and an uncanny ability to always say the right thing, was the golden child, basking in the warmth of our parents' easy admiration. I, quieter and more introspective, often felt like an awkward shadow, my edges too rough, my observations too keen for the comfortable narratives our family preferred. This dynamic, set in childhood, had solidified into a polite but palpable distance between us as adults. We exchanged birthday cards, brief holiday calls, but the heart of our connection had long ago been paved over with unspoken grievances and differing worldviews. So, when the invitation arrived, I wasn't entirely surprised by its opulence, but by its existence at all. I'd half expected Serena to simply announce her marriage via a perfectly curated social media post, perhaps from a sun-drenched vineyard in some idyllic, far-off locale. Instead, a thick, cream-colored envelope, embossed with elegant, swirling calligraphy, landed on my doormat. Serena Annalise Thorne and Marcus Alastair Harrington request the honor of your presence at their marriage. My name, Alara Evangeline Vance, was handwritten beneath, the ink a deep, serious blue. Tucked inside, pressed against the RSVP card, was a small, almost translucent slip of paper, like an afterthought. On it, in Serena's familiar, perfectly looped handwriting, was a single sentence. Darling Alara, do try to find something appropriately elegant for the occasion. We want everything to be perfect. S. I read that little note several times, the paper cool against my fingertips. Appropriately elegant. Not something you love, or where whatever makes you feel good. The implication, subtle yet sharp as a pinprick, was clear. My usual style, practical and unadorned, wouldn't pass muster. The S, at the end, so neat and final, felt less like an initial and more like a gentle, silken constraint. Here I was, 34 years old, a woman who had navigated refugee camps and negotiated with local militias, still being subtly schooled on propriety by a sister who once burst into tears because her prom corsage wasn't the exact shade of blush pink she'd envisioned. The last time I'd seen Serena in person was nearly 5 years ago, at our grandmother's funeral. I'd flown in from a particularly harrowing stint in a drought-stricken region of East Africa. I was weary, my skin weathered, my clothes smelling faintly of dust and antiseptic. Mother had embraced me with a worried tenderness, her eyes lingering on the new lines etched around my own. Serena, however, had offered a brief, air kiss near my cheek, her gaze flicking over me with a polite, almost clinical assessment before she turned back to accept condolences with a grace that seemed both innate and meticulously practiced. Later, when I tried to share a small, poignant memory of Grandma, Serena had gently steered the conversation towards the beautiful floral arrangements, as if my unpolished grief might stain the carefully managed solemnity of the day. We hadn't truly spoken since, our lives continuing on their parallel, non-intersecting tracks. I placed the invitation on the small wooden table by my window, where it sat beside a collection of sea glass and a well-loved book of Mary Oliver's poetry. For days, it remained there, a quiet, persistent reminder. I was tempted to send my regrets, to plead a prior commitment, a sudden, unavoidable journey. But then Mother called, her voice laced with that familiar blend of hope and trepidation she always adopted when navigating the fragile peace between her daughters. Alara, dear, it would mean so much to Serena, to all of us, if you could come. She's put so much heart into planning this day. Put so much heart, I mused, knowing Serena's version of heart likely involved a team of professionals, a meticulously organized binder, and a fiancé whose primary role was to agree enthusiastically. I swallowed the cynicism that rose in my throat and told Mother I would consider it, a response that, I knew, was more than Serena probably anticipated. The following evening, as the sun bled orange and violet into the sea, I found myself browsing flights to Willow Creek, the town where Serena still lived, near our parents. I told myself I was going for Mother, to offer her the small comfort of having both her daughters present, even if under a fragile truce. But if I were truly honest with myself, standing there with the scent of salty air drifting through my open window, I knew I was also going because of that delicate, almost invisible note. That gentle prod towards, appropriately elegant. It wasn't about defiance, not in the way it might have been years ago. It was something quieter, a need to stand in my own truth, to occupy my space without apology, even if that space was deemed inappropriate or inelegant by Serena's standards. Perhaps, I thought, it was time to see if I could be present at her perfectly curated event without losing myself in the process. The journey to Willow Creek felt like stepping back in time. The familiar landscape, the rolling hills giving way to the quaint, tree-lined streets of my childhood, evoked a cascade of memories, some soft and warm, others etched with a faint, lingering ache. The family home, a rambling Victorian with a wide porch and slightly peeling white paint, smelled exactly as I remembered, a comforting blend of lemon polish, my mother's lavender sachets, and the faintest, almost imperceptible scent of old resentments, like dust settled in hard-to-reach corners. Mother enveloped me in a tight hug, her eyes glistening. "Oh, Alara, you're here. You look, well, a little tired perhaps, but well." Her hand lingered on my arm, a silent acknowledgement of the paths I'd walked. Serena emerged a moment later from the living room, a vision of casual Pinterestery in a cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored jeans. She paused, her head tilted slightly, a practiced smile gracing her lips. "Alara, you made it. Goodness, you still favor those rather sturdy boots, don't you?" It wasn't overtly cruel, but it was Serena's way, a gentle nudge that always managed to highlight my perceived otherness. We were 34 and 30, yet the old dynamics clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Dinner that evening was a carefully choreographed performance of familial harmony. Mother chattered brightly, filling silences that threatened to deepen into chasms. Serena's fiancé, Marcus, was pleasant and earnest, asking polite questions about my travels with an air of someone trying to understand a rare and exotic species. I didn't blame him. He was an outsider to our particular brand of dysfunction. He hadn't witnessed Serena's childhood ability to manufacture tears on demand to escape blame, or her talent for twisting narratives until she emerged blameless, leaving me to absorb the fallout. At one point, as she delicately picked at her kale salad, Serena looked across the table, her expression one of serene authority. "By the way, Alara," she began, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight, "I trust you understand that white, or anything even resembling bridal ivory, is quite out of the question for the wedding. We're aiming for a very traditional, very pure aesthetic, and well." She paused, her smile imbued with a sweetness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You comprehend." She didn't need to elaborate. The unspoken words, you, with your unconventional life, your past, your inherent lack of bridal suitability, hung in the air, as visible as the steam rising from the tea. Marcus looked momentarily puzzled. Mother's gaze dropped to her plate. I met Serena's eyes, held them for a beat, and then offered a small, slow nod. A faint smile touched my own lips. "Of course, Serena. I wouldn't dream of dimming your light." Later that night, in the guest room, a space that still bore faint traces of my teenage self in a bookshelf of well-worn paperbacks and a faded constellation map tacked to the ceiling, I lay awake, listening to the old house creak and settle around me. The slow, rhythmic sweep of the ceiling fan above was almost hypnotic. I thought about the version of Alara they all seemed to hold on to, the restless spirit, the one who sought out distant, difficult places, the one who returned with stories they didn't quite want to hear and a quiet sorrow in her eyes they couldn't quite understand. To them, pure meant unblemished, untested, a life lived within carefully prescribed lines. And I, by their definition, had strayed far from those lines, had seen too much, felt too deeply, and borne witness to realities that defied easy categorization. Unable to sleep, I rose and wandered through the darkened, silent house. A soft light spilled from under Serena's old bedroom door. On impulse, I pushed it open gently. The room was a confection of blush and cream, meticulously preserved, like a museum exhibit of idealized girlhood. It was almost suffocating in its perfection. My eyes scanned the shelves, the perfectly arranged trinkets, the pristine vanity. Then, tucked away on the highest shelf of her walk-in closet, almost hidden behind a row of designer shoeboxes, I saw it, a small, unadorned wooden box, the kind one might use for keepsakes. It seemed out of place in the otherwise flawless room. A strange premonition, a quiet hum of intuition, drew me towards it. Reaching up, my fingers brushed against the cool, smooth wood. I carefully brought it down. The lid wasn't locked. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a small, carefully tied bundle of letters, their edges softened with age. Beside them, a dried, pressed flower, a white gardenia, its petals now brittle and brown. And beneath these, something else, a small, clear plastic bag. Within the bag was a pregnancy test, the kind with two stark lines clearly visible in the small window, unmistakably positive. And under the test, a single sheet of paper, folded multiple times, its creases deep and worn. The paper was water-stained in places, the ink slightly blurred, but the handwriting was sharp, almost frantic. "Leo, please, don't call again. I can't do this. I can't tell them. My parents, they'd never understand. It has to be this way." I stared at the contents of the box for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in around me. The air in the room, once so cloyingly sweet, now felt heavy, thick with the weight of this hidden truth. It wasn't anger I felt, not the sharp sting of vindication I might have once craved. It was a profound, aching sadness, a weariness that settled deep in my bones. Serena, the epitome of carefully constructed perfection, had her own unacknowledged storms, her own silent shipwrecks. In that quiet, solitary moment, holding the fragile evidence of her past, a startling realization bloomed within me. I was not the only one in this family who had lived a life more complex and shadowed than the surface suggested. But there was a difference. I had, in my own way, made peace with my shadows. Serena, it seemed, was still desperately trying to outrun hers. And as I gently closed the box and returned it to its hiding place, I knew that her carefully chosen words about purity, her insistence on a flawless aesthetic, were not just about a wedding. They were about a lifetime of trying to maintain an illusion. And that, I realized, was a heavier burden than any I carried. The first pale light of dawn was seeping through the lace curtains of the guest room when I finally stirred from a restless sleep. The old house was quiet, holding its breath before the day's activities began. My body ached with a familiar tension, a physical manifestation of the emotional currents swirling within me. On the antique dresser, the memory of that small wooden box and its fragile contents seemed to shimmer in the dim light, a silent testament to secrets kept and lives unlived. I hadn't looked at it again, but its presence resonated, a quiet counterpoint to the impending pageant of perfection downstairs. Serena's pure aesthetic suddenly felt less like a preference and more like a carefully constructed fortress. I showered slowly, letting the warm water sluice away the lingering shadows of the night. The name, Leo, echoed in my mind. The handwriting on the note, though blurred, had a desperate, almost jagged quality, as if penned in haste or anguish. I had a vague recollection of a Leo from Serena's university days. He'd been an art student, I thought, quiet and intense, with a guitar often slung over his shoulder. He'd been a fleeting presence, mentioned in hushed tones during family dinners, usually in the context of our father's mild disapproval of his unsettled artistic aspirations. He had faded from Serena's narrative as quickly as he'd appeared, replaced by a series of more suitable young men. After a perfunctory breakfast, during which Mother fussed over me with an anxious energy, pressing toast and jam into my hands as if to ward off some unspoken ill, I retreated to the sunroom with a cup of tea. Serena was already in motion, a whirlwind of phone calls and checklists, her voice a shade too bright as she conferred with florists and caterers. The air thrummed with her nervous energy. Taking out my phone, I did a quick search. Leo's surname, if I remembered it correctly, was somewhat uncommon. Within minutes, I found a profile that seemed to match. It was private, but the profile picture showed a man with kind, familiar eyes and a gentle smile, though his dark hair now showed threads of silver at the temples. He was holding a small child, a little girl with bright, curious eyes, perched comfortably on his hip. There was a quiet contentment in his expression that resonated with me. I hesitated for only a moment before composing a brief message. Leo? This is Alara Vance, Serena's sister. I came across something from a long time ago that I believe you might have a right to know about. Would you be open to a quiet conversation? I sent it, then set my phone aside, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve, only that a hidden truth often has a way of casting long, distorting shadows until it's brought into the light. Serena found me on the porch, swing a little later, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a shield. The morning sun filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree, dappling the wooden planks with shifting patterns of light and shade. Alara, she said, her tone brisk. Just a little reminder for the rehearsal dinner tonight, best to stick to muted tones. The photographer will be capturing some candid shots, and we're aiming for a cohesive, elegant look. Nothing too conspicuous. I took a slow sip of my tea, the warm ceramic comforting in my hands. I met her gaze, holding it steadily. I was thinking of a soft dove gray, I replied, my voice even. Wouldn't want my presence to introduce any discordant notes into your symphony of perfection. A flicker of something, surprise? Annoyance? Crossed her face before she composed it back into a polite smile. You always did have a unique way with words, Alara, she murmured, then turned and swept back into the house, the screen door clicking shut behind her. I watched her go, a familiar ache tightening my chest. It wasn't just her words, but the ease with which she dismissed anything that didn't fit her narrative, the way she could make me feel like an uninvited guest in my own family. But this time, something felt different within me. The knowledge of that small wooden box of Leo, of a shared, hidden vulnerability, had shifted the ground beneath my feet. It was mid-afternoon when my phone chimed with a reply. Alara. Yes, I remember you. What is it you found? Leo's message was concise, tinged with a cautious curiosity. I replied honestly, briefly explaining about the test and the letter, about the child Serena had evidently carried and chosen not to tell him about. I didn't editorialize, didn't embellish. I simply laid out the facts as I knew them. I suggested we meet, somewhere quiet, if he was willing. He agreed, and we arranged to meet at a small, unassuming cafe on the outskirts of Willow Creek later that evening, a place known for its anonymity and strong coffee. When I arrived, Leo was already there, seated at a small table by the window. He looked older, yes, but the kindness in his eyes was unchanged. He rose as I approached, a hesitant smile touching his lips. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the clatter of cups and quiet conversations around us a muted backdrop. I had taken photos of the letter and the test with my phone, and I slid it across the table to him. He studied the images for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of a deep, weary disbelief. She never told me, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She just vanished. One day she was there, the next gone. I called, I wrote, nothing. I thought I'd done something terrible, driven her away. His voice was raw with old pain, a hurt that had clearly lingered for years. He looked up at me, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound, bewildered sorrow. Why show me this now, Alara? After all this time? I took a deep breath. How could I explain the complex tapestry of duty, empathy, and a quiet yearning for authenticity that had led me here? Because, Leo, I began, choosing my words carefully, Serena has spent her life curating an image of perfection. And sometimes, those images are built on silences that hurt more than spoken truths. She recently reminded me, rather pointedly, that I wasn't pure enough for her traditional wedding. I paused. I suppose I felt that someone should gently hold up a mirror, not out of malice, but perhaps in the hope that she might see that true strength isn't about flawlessness, but about embracing our whole, imperfect selves. Leo let out a soft, humorless laugh. She always did have a talent for casting herself as the innocent. Even then, We talked for a while longer, not about revenge or exposure, but about the quiet burdens of the past. I assured him I had no intention of causing a public spectacle. That wasn't my way. But I also knew I could no longer enable the charade by remaining silent and complicit in her carefully constructed narrative. Before we parted, Leo looked at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Why did you really come back for this wedding, Alara?" I considered his question. "Perhaps," I said softly, "because I needed to. Because for too long, I allowed their definition of me to be the only one that mattered. And I think, somewhere deep down, I came back to reclaim my own." Returning to the family home that evening, a sense of quiet resolve had settled within me. I didn't yet know how the wedding day would unfold, but I knew I would face it as myself, not as the muted, apologetic version Serena expected. Sometimes, the most powerful statements are made not with loud declarations, but with the quiet courage of simply being true. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of luminous autumn day that poets write about. Yet, a subtle headache pulsed behind my eyes, a dull counterpoint to the vibrant energy that already filled the house. By the time I ventured downstairs, the air was thick with the scent of hairspray, expensive perfume, and the nervous excitement of last-minute preparations. Hairstylists and makeup artists moved with practiced efficiency around Serena, who sat enthroned in a silk robe, issuing directives like a benevolent queen. Her laughter, a little too high-pitched, a little too frequent, echoed through the rooms. She didn't acknowledge me immediately when I entered the kitchen, seeking the solace of a simple cup of black coffee. I was dressed in my usual comfortable attire, soft, worn jeans and a plain linen shirt, a quiet rebellion in itself amidst the flurry of silk and lace. When her gaze finally landed on me, her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched slightly. Alara, you're up. I almost thought you might have decided to explore the local scenery this morning," she said, her tone light, but the underlying message clear. I offered a small smile. "Wouldn't miss this for the world, Serena. After all, a sister's wedding is a momentous occasion." My voice was calm, devoid of the sarcasm that might have once tinged it. This seemed to unnerve her more than any overt challenge. She turned back to the makeup artist, but I saw the slight tightening of her lips. I spent the next few hours as a quiet observer, a ghost at the periphery of the festivities. I watched Serena transform, layer by layer, into the perfect bride. Compliments flowed around her like a river, each one seeming to bolster the carefully constructed edifice of her joy. Mother hovered anxiously, her face a mixture of pride and a subtle, unspoken worry that I recognized all too well. I was the wild card, the unpredictable element in Serena's meticulously planned equation. I could feel the unspoken expectation from everyone: be quiet, be invisible, don't disrupt the illusion. Around mid-morning, as I was retreating to the solitude of the garden with my book, Serena intercepted me in the hallway. Her makeup was immaculate, her hair swept into an intricate knot, but her eyes held a familiar glint of steel. "Alara," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I need to be very clear. Today is my day. It is about Marcus and me, about our future. It is not an occasion for personal statements or unresolved issues. Please, for Mother's sake, if not for mine, just blend in. Be happy for me. Can you do that?" I looked at her, at the carefully blank mask she wore, and I felt a pang of something that wasn't anger, but a deep, sorrowful understanding. She was so trapped within her own creation. I nodded slowly. "I understand, Serena. I will be nothing but respectful of your day." She seemed to relax, a small sigh escaping her lips. She gave me a brief, almost grateful smile before turning and hurrying back to her attendants. She had heard my words, but I wondered if she had truly understood their depth. Respectful, yes. Invisible? No. Back in the quiet of the guest room, I opened the garment bag I had carefully packed and hung in the back of the wardrobe, concealed behind a collection of old sporting equipment. Inside, my service uniform hung, impeccably pressed. It was a simple, dark blue ensemble, the uniform I wore when representing the relief organization at formal functions or during sensitive negotiations. It wasn't military, not in the way one might imagine, but it spoke of service, of dedication, of a life lived with purpose beyond the superficial. It had no flashy medals, only a small, discreet pin signifying years of commitment to humanitarian aid. The fabric was unadorned, the lines clean and understated. It was, in its own way, profoundly elegant. And it was profoundly me. As I dressed, I thought of Serena's words, her desperate plea for a pure aesthetic. The white gown she would soon wear was a symbol, yes, but what did it truly symbolize if it hid so much fear, so many unspoken truths? Purity, I mused, wasn't about an unblemished past or a pristine appearance. Perhaps true purity lay in the courage to be authentic, to live with integrity, even when, especially when it was difficult. The uniform felt right, a quiet statement of my own values, my own journey. It wasn't an act of defiance, but an act of self-reclamation. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not a troublemaker or an outcast, but a woman who had found her own way, who had earned her place at any table, not through conformity, but through resilience. I arrived at the quaint, historic chapel where the ceremony was to be held just as guests were beginning to take their seats. The air was filled with the scent of lilies and beeswax, the low murmur of polite conversation. I slipped into a pew near the back, on the bride's side, a quiet figure in a sea of pastels and floral prints. The reaction was subtle, not a dramatic gasp, but a slow turning of heads, a ripple of curiosity. A few guests exchanged hushed whispers, their eyes lingering on the unfamiliar simplicity and quiet authority of my attire. My father, standing near the entrance greeting arrivals, caught my eye. His expression was unreadable for a moment, then he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod before turning away. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't there to provoke, only to be present, wholly and authentically myself. The organ music swelled, a traditional, solemn melody, and the heavy oak doors at the back of the chapel opened. Serena appeared, a vision in white, her arm linked through our father's. Her gown was magnificent, a cascade of lace and silk, her veil a cloud of shimmering tulle. She glided down the aisle, her smile serene, her eyes fixed on Marcus, who waited at the altar, his face alight with adoration. She looked every inch the perfect, radiant bride. She was halfway to the altar when her gaze, perhaps unconsciously, swept over the pews. For a fleeting second, her eyes met mine. The serene smile didn't vanish, but it faltered, a tiny, almost invisible tremor, like a crack appearing in flawless porcelain. Her step didn't falter, her head didn't turn, but I saw the flicker of recognition, of surprise, perhaps even of dawning unease. I held her gaze for that brief instant, my expression calm, my heart steady. Then she looked away, her focus returning to the altar, to the man waiting to become her husband. The ceremony proceeded, the vows exchanged, the rings presented. The officiant spoke of love, commitment, and lifelong partnership. And as I sat there, a quiet witness in my simple blue uniform, I felt not like an intruder, but like a silent guardian of a truth that needed, someday, to be acknowledged. The air in the chapel was thick with unspoken words, but for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with my own silence. The reception was held in the grand ballroom of Willow Creek's oldest hotel, a place of faded elegance, with towering arched windows and crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow over the proceedings. The room buzzed with laughter and clinking champagne flutes. Music, a lively jazz ensemble, filled the air and couples swirled across the polished dance floor. Serena, radiant and seemingly carefree, moved among her guests, a gracious hostess, her earlier flicker of unease apparently forgotten, or at least expertly concealed. Marcus was by her side, beaming, clearly besotted. I found a quiet alcove near a window, content to observe rather than participate in the revelry. Several guests, mostly from Marcus's side of family, approached me throughout the evening. Their questions about my unusual attire were polite, tinged with curiosity. I answered simply, explaining my work with the relief organization, sharing a few anodyne anecdotes. I felt no need to justify myself, no desire to draw undue attention. I was merely present, a quiet note in the larger symphony of the celebration. Then came the toasts. The best man, affable and slightly nervous, shared a humorous story about Marcus's college days. The maid of honor, Serena's lifelong friend, spoke with tearful sincerity about Serena's dreams and her joy at finding Marcus. The atmosphere was warm, convivial, filled with affection and good wishes. And then, Serena herself rose, tapping her champagne flute lightly with a spoon. The room fell silent, all eyes on the bride. "Thank you all for being here to share this incredibly special day with us," she began, her voice clear and melodious. She spoke eloquently of her love for Marcus, her gratitude to their families. Then, her eyes found mine across the room. A small, almost challenging smile played on her lips. "And I see my dear sister Alara is with us." Alara, who always brings her own unique perspective to every occasion. A ripple of polite, slightly uncertain laughter went through the room. "Perhaps, Alara, you'd like to say a few words? Offer a toast to the happy couple." The spotlight, unexpected and unwelcome, was suddenly on me. I could feel the collective gaze of the room, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. For a moment, the old impulse to shrink, to apologize, to make myself small, tugged at me. But then, I met Serena's gaze, saw the faint challenge in her eyes, and a different feeling rose within me, a quiet strength, a sense of self-possession I had fought long and hard to cultivate. I rose slowly, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. I picked up my water glass, I hadn't touched the champagne, and walked towards the microphone that had been set up for the speeches. The room was utterly silent. "Thank you, Serena," I began, my voice calm and even, carrying easily through the quiet ballroom. "To Serena and Marcus." I paused, letting my gaze sweep gently over the guests before returning to my sister and her new husband. "May your life together be built on a foundation of profound honesty, not just with each other, but with yourselves. May you find the courage to embrace all that you are, the light and the shadows, for it is in acknowledging our whole selves that we find true connection." I looked directly at Serena, my expression open, my voice gentle but firm. Perfection, I've learned, is an illusion. It's not about flawless surfaces or unblemished histories. True beauty, true strength, lies in our imperfections, in our vulnerabilities, and in the grace we extend to ourselves and to others as we navigate this complex journey of life. May you both find endless grace for each other. I raised my glass. To honesty, to courage, and to a love that is strong enough to hold all of it. A profound silence followed my words. It wasn't an angry silence, nor an uncomfortable one, but a thoughtful, almost meditative quiet. No one applauded immediately. It was as if my words had created a space for reflection, a momentary pause in the celebratory tide. Then, from the back of the room, near the entrance, a figure moved almost imperceptibly. It was Leo. I hadn't explicitly invited him to the reception, but in our conversation, I had mentioned the venue, the time. He had made his own choice to be there, a quiet witness. He wasn't looking at me, but at Serena. Serena's face, which had been composed into an expression of polite interest during my toast, slowly paled. Her eyes, wide and suddenly vulnerable, locked onto Leo. The carefully constructed facade of bridal bliss seemed to tremble, to crack. Marcus, noticing her distress, turned, following her gaze. His brow furrowed in confusion as he saw the stranger standing near the door, a man whose presence clearly had a profound and unsettling effect on his new wife. The air in the ballroom, moments before so light and effervescent, grew heavy, charged with unspoken questions and dawning realizations. The music had stopped. The joyful chatter had died away. All that remained was the stark, undeniable presence of a truth that had finally, quietly, stepped into the light. The shift in the room was palpable, a silent, seismic tremor that rippled outwards from Serena. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on Marcus's arm, tightened, her knuckles showing white beneath her flawless skin. Marcus looked from Serena's stricken face to Leo, then back again, a dawning bewilderment in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The joyous celebration had fractured, the pieces suspended in a sudden, stark tableau. Leo didn't move further into the room. He simply stood there, his expression a mixture of sorrow and a quiet resolve. He wasn't there to accuse, I sensed, but to be seen, to acknowledge a past that had been denied for too long. His presence was a quiet echo of my words, a testament to the complexities that lay beneath the surface of Serena's carefully curated life. Serena, for a long moment, seemed frozen. Then, slowly, almost mechanically, she turned away from Leo, away from Marcus's questioning gaze. She didn't speak, didn't offer an explanation. The vibrant color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking fragile, almost translucent, beneath the glittering chandeliers. The mask of the perfect bride had slipped, revealing the vulnerable, perhaps frightened, woman beneath. I felt a pang of empathy for her, for the immense pressure she must have felt, for the choices she had made in fear and silence. But I also knew that this moment, however painful, was necessary. True healing, true growth, often begins when illusions shatter. I stepped away from the microphone, placed my water glass on a nearby table, and without another word, turned and walked towards the exit. I didn't look back. I could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, but my steps were steady. As I reached the ornate double doors of the ballroom, I heard a tentative, hesitant chord from the jazz ensemble, a musician attempting to fill the void, to smooth over the sudden, jarring silence. Outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief. The sky was a sweep of indigo sprinkled with distant stars. I stood for a moment on the hotel steps, breathing deeply, the sounds of the city a muted hum around me. I didn't feel triumphant, nor did I feel vindictive. There was just a quiet sense of release, as if a heavy weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying had finally been set down. A few minutes later, Leo emerged from the hotel. He walked over to where I stood, his hands in his pockets. "That was quite a toast," he said, his voice soft. I nodded. I spoke what felt true. "She saw me," he stated, not a question. "Yes." We stood in silence for a moment, two peripheral figures in Serena's unfolding drama. "Thank you, Alara," he said finally. "For the truth. It's a strange thing, after all these years, but thank you. She deserved to face it, Leo. And perhaps you deserved for it to be acknowledged," I replied gently. He gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe we all deserve a little honesty, even when it's hard." He looked back at the glowing windows of the ballroom. "I should go. My daughter will be wondering where I am." "She's lucky to have you," I said, and I meant it. He met my gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between us. "Take care, Alara." "You too, Leo." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the city night. I watched him go, then walked to my rental car, the simple lines of my uniform feeling less like an act of defiance and more like a quiet affirmation of self. As I drove away from the hotel, away from Willow Creek, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was uncertain, as all roads are, but it felt open, clear. I didn't know what would happen between Serena and Marcus, or whether Serena would ever find the courage to dismantle the fortress she had built around herself. That was her journey, not mine. My own journey had brought me to a place of quiet self-acceptance, a fragile peace forged in the crucible of difficult truths. As the miles unfurled, carrying me back towards my little cottage by the sea, I thought about family, about love, about the intricate, often painful ways we wound and heal each other. Perhaps reconciliation wasn't always about grand gestures or tearful reunions. Perhaps sometimes it was simply about learning to see each other and ourselves with a little more honesty, a little more compassion. And in that quiet understanding, I found a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I'd been seeking. The path ahead was mine to choose, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready to walk it, not in anyone else's shadow, but in my own gentle light.